If you know me, you've heard me say it a lot. If you only know me from this channel, you've heard me say it at least once. That The Social Network is the best movie of the decade so far. And while I'm not positive that's still the case, it remains an example of damn near perfect storytelling. I'm not saying it's a perfect movie, because so few, if any of those exist, but just from a storytelling standpoint, looking at the story they had to tell and the way they told it, it's just about flawless. In a big picture kind of way, this story kind of writes itself. A social outcast who founds the world's largest social network? Come on. But the execution of this concept by Sorkin's script is just phenomenal. Now, I'm admittedly a huge Aaron Sorkin fan. Yes, he's an easy target for parody.
I sleep on a futon. I've been using the same Brita for 3 years. My roommate is a bassist. You tell corporate I'm not putting apple slices on my menu.
But the fact is, the dude's a master of his craft. And you see this within the first 30 seconds. Sorkin is best known for his dialogue.
The ping pong dialogue.
The ping pong dialogue?
The ping pong dialogue.
The ping pong dialogue?
The ping pong dialogue.
Jokes aside, his dialogue has an unparalleled flow and rhythm to it. And this is very purposeful.
Oftentimes, they took me to see plays that I was too young to understand. Even though I didn't understand the story, I didn't understand what was happening on stage, I loved the sound of dialogue. It sounded like music to me, and I wanted to imitate that sound.
And you can hear the music in this opening scene.
You got a 1600?
Yes, I could sing in an acapella group, but I can't
Does that
sing.
mean you actually got nothing
I
wrong?
could row crew or invent a $25 PC.
Or you get into a final club?
Or I get into a final club.
He uses his strength of rhythmic dialogue to establish right out the gate how quick-thinking Mark is, to the point that he leaves Erica's and the audience's head spinning.
Maybe it's just sometimes you say two things at once, I'm not sure which one I'm supposed to be aiming at.
But that's definitely not the only thing this opening scene accomplishes. Sorkin preaches that the drive shaft of any story is intention and conflict. Put another way, what does a character want and what stands in his way? And Sorkin wastes absolutely no time, as we learn our protagonist's intention.
Here's my question. How do you distinguish yourself in a population of people who all got 1600 on their SATs? You're just saying I need to do something substantial in order to get the attention of the clubs.
And what stands in his way.
Okay, well, which is the easiest to get into?
Why would you ask me that?
I was just asking.
None of them. That's the point.
Intention and conflict within the first 30 seconds of the movie. Speaking of efficiency, this first scene also establishes Eduardo as a character despite him not even being in the scene.
My friend Eduardo made $300,000 betting oil futures one summer, and Eduardo won't come close to getting in. The ability to make money doesn't impress anybody around here.
Must be nice. You made $300,000 in the summer?
And perhaps most importantly, it sets up Mark's persona for the rest of the film.
You're gonna go through life thinking that girls don't like you because you're a nerd. And I want you to know from the bottom of my heart that that won't be true. It'll be because you're an asshole.
Which we obviously get a payoff for in the film's closing line 2 hours later.
You're not an asshole, Mark. You're just trying so hard to be.
And while this first scene is brilliant, the quality doesn't drop. Just look at the second scene. Blogging and hacking aren't supposed to be cinematically interesting, because when you get down to it, it's just a dude typing on a computer, no matter how much other movies and TV shows try and fail to spice it up. But here, the voiceover and screen inserts make it work, and the juxtaposition of Mark's hacking the Facebooks with the girls on their way to the Phoenix makes it thematically relevant. Also, notice that while Mark's comparing Harvard women to farm animals, the Phoenix is very much treating them like cattle, rounding them up and herding them into a line. And I know I mentioned Eduardo's introduction in the first scene, but really all of the character introductions are great. When we actually see Eduardo for the first time in the second scene, just like with Mark, we learn so much about our character within the first few seconds.
Yeah. Are you all right? I need you. I'm here for you.
Attentive, empathetic, a good friend to a guy who doesn't have many, and also hesitant about his ambitions.
You mean other students?
Yeah.
You think this is such a good idea?
I need the algorithm.
Mark.
I need the algorithm.
But a team player all the same.
Give each girl a base rating of 1400.
This is nearly everything we need to know about Eduardo's character in the first 2 minutes we see him. How about the Winklevoss introduction? Before they even open their mouths, we see their dominance. We see that these guys are winners. And because Mark already made a point about guys who row crew, we already know that these are guys Mark admires, wants to be like, and wants approval from, even before knowing they're in the pork, which is just icing on the cake. And after they've been on screen for less than 2 minutes, we cut to the deposition.
You know what I think? Way ahead of you. This is our guy. Cameron Winklevoss, W-I-N.
Basically, the movie is saying, here are the characters, here's a little bit about them and how they relate to the protagonist, and oh, by the way, they'll be important later, so pay attention. Then there's the Sean Parker introduction. Instead of some rushed exposition about Napster and who Sean Parker is, we get this great scene, which, like the other introductions, accomplishes a lot. We learn who he is.
I founded Napster.
Sean Parker founded Napster.
Nice to meet you.
We learn his current situation.
What are you?
Broke. There's not a lot of money in free music, even less when you're being sued by everyone who's ever been to the Grammys.
We learn that he's deceptively smart.
How do you go to a party and you meet
Amelia
somebody?
Ritter, but you prefer Amy. You're from Orinda, your father's in commercial real estate, and your mother's 10 years sober.
And we see that dangerous charisma.
Biochem, even though you're a French major whose name is Amy.
You passed.
I'm a hard worker.
Not to mention, it gives him a reason to find the Facebook. And none of this exposition, and yes, this is all exposition, feels forced. In real life, Sean Parker allegedly saw the Facebook on his roommate's girlfriend's computer, who was a Stanford student at the time. But like so many other creative licenses taken by this movie, this version of events works so much better thematically. In a way, this introduction shows us a perfect representation of where this character is at in his life, in a, quote, morning after stage. After being kicked out of his second multi-million-dollar company before his 25th birthday, it's like this character is constantly living in the morning after Napster. He's at a place in his life where he opens his eyes and says, wow, last night was fun, but now what? And that's when he finds his now what. This Sean Parker sequence also shows us another major strength of the script, how it flows seamlessly. This story has a fair amount of moving parts. 2 depositions, Mark's storyline of creating the Facebook, which includes a side story of the Winklevosses and Divian, and Eduardo's side story. And it fits together so seamlessly, sometimes you forget how many pieces there are. Clarity is so difficult to maintain with multiple storylines, but it's something you don't really appreciate until it's not there. There's a sequence 30 minutes into the movie where there's a montage of Mark working on the Facebook, Eduardo attending Phoenix punch parties, the Winklevosses and Divian getting shirked by Mark, and their lawyer reading Mark's emails. Sometimes the lawyer's reading is intercut with Div reading them.
I won't really be free to meet until next Wednesday afternoon.
I have to cancel Wednesday afternoon. I've basically been in the lab this whole time, and also I
won't be able to do Saturday as I have to meet up with my parents.
The score crescendos in all 4 of these interwoven stories reach their respective peaks simultaneously.
to the best of your knowledge, had he even begun work on Harbor Connection?
Not to my knowledge, no.
What world is this? Hey Cameron, I'm still a little skeptical that we have enough functionality in the site to really draw the attention and gain the critical mass necessary to get a site like this to run. We'll speak soon?
It all flows together seamlessly. Or how about this cut?
Why Stanford?
Why do you think?
Sorry. I'm late for biochem.
I've already talked about how great this scene is, but you also have to appreciate its placement in the flow of the storylines. We hear why Stanford, and suddenly we're at Stanford. But for nearly 2.5 minutes, this scene plays out without any hint of how it's connected to our story. So we're just left wondering, what are we doing here? Why is Justin Timberlake here? Why is the girl from 50 Shades of Grey here? And why do I know about 50 Shades of Grey even though it won't come out for another 4.5 years?
Am I a wizard? Have I always been a wizard? Well, then why don't I have a demon?
But again, they don't rush it. They just let the scene play out. And then, payoff. That's how it connects to our story. Once again, brilliant exposition, and once again, it all flows together seamlessly. Or how about this transition?
100 schools by the end of the summer? Yeah. Tell you what, gesture of good faith. When you're getting into 100 schools, I'll put you on 2 continents.
And suddenly we're on a second continent for the Henley sequence. And we learn, along with the Winklevosses, that Sean has made good on his promise.
And they have Facebook at Cambridge.
And apparently Oxford and the London School of Economics. That's where her friends are.
That's awesome.
We get our setup in one of the storylines and payoff in one of the other storylines. Even with intercutting stories, it's all always moving forward, one storyline referencing the other. Back to this Henley sequence. Not only is it brilliant editing, it's a microcosm for the Winklevosses' whole storyline. They come so close to winning, losing by half a boat length. Divian turns away in horror, unable to bear it. We've seen them row on the river, we've seen them row in the tank, and we've heard them talk about the Olympics, but this is the only time we see them actually compete. And they lose, heartbreakingly, just as they lose to Mark. Speaking of great editing, there's a lot of very good visual storytelling in this movie. I don't usually talk about directing or cinematography because I know nothing about them, but these are just a few things I noticed and a few things I like. Most of this movie is just characters sitting around talking, but Fincher can make that interesting by utilizing close-ups, framing, and zooms. In the first scene, we have an establishing two-shot and alternating medium shots, until...
Or you get into a final club?
Or I get into a final club.
2 close-ups for emphasis. Even if we have no clue what final clubs are, we now know they are important. They're the goal, the endgame, the MacGuffin. That is a crucial close-up. And the next time Fincher uses the close-up is with this line.
Well, which is the easiest to get into?
Why would you ask me that?
I was just asking.
When the conversation takes a turn, Mark's demeanor completely changes, and it's the beginning of the end of Mark and Erica. And then back to the medium shots, and then of course, the final close-up.
It'll be because you're an asshole.
The most crucial lines, the most crucial moments, are beautifully emphasized. Fast forward to another scene of characters sitting around talking, which, again, is most of the movie. The Winklevosses and Divian have just found out about the Facebook and that Mark has seemingly stole their idea. Tyler and Div are immediately furious, but Cameron is slower to jump to conclusions about Mark's intentions.
This is a good guy.
We don't know that he's not a good guy.
We know he stole our idea. We know he lied to our faces for a month and a half.
No, he never lied to our faces.
And Fincher shows this visually. In the full shot, Div and Tyler are both facing Cameron, as if ganging up on him. And in the medium shots, Cam has to fend off both of them in turn. Also note that it's Cameron who faces the camera in the full shots, as if the movie itself is on the side of Div and Tyler, demanding that Cameron defend his position to us as well as them. There's a moment I love when Peter Thiel gets involved. As he's discussing his $500,000 investment in corporate restructuring, there's this pull into his face, and he asks the critical question.
Now, let me ask you something. Who's Eduardo Saverin?
As he does so, who's lurking in the background out of focus? Who happens to turn his head just as this critical question is posed? The man pulling the strings. The man strategically wedging himself between Mark and Eduardo. And the very next scene shows that wedge between them in this phone call. As Eduardo tries to defend his actions to Mark, a fire is literally being lit behind his back. Little does he know that Sean and Mark have by now devised a figurative fire behind his back, in the form of the coming ambush. And then of course, Eduardo has to put out a literal fire from Christie while trying to put out a figurative fire with Mark.
Eduardo, I've got some good news.
I'm sorry. I was angry, and maybe it was childish, but I had to get your attention.
Unfortunately, only one is successful. And I love this moment as the lights go out behind Mark in this depth of field shot, as he simultaneously realizes several things. That Eduardo is probably right about Sean, that he, Mark, may have backed the wrong horse, and despite reaching 1 million users, he's still completely alone. Which brings me to the ending. While the first scene is incredible, I also love the ending scene because there are so many callbacks to the first scene, and the movie even draws your attention to this right off the bat.
Do you want to get something to eat? You want to get some food?
Thinking back to the opening, what Mark hates admitting is that despite doing all the right things in high school to get into Harvard, now he has to do more.
How do you distinguish yourself in a population of people who all got 1,600 on their SATs?
It's not enough just being smart. More is expected of him. He has to do something.
I could sing in an acapella group, but I can't
Does that
sing.
mean you actually got nothing
I
wrong?
could row crew or invent a $25 PC.
And now he's finally done something, but it's still not enough.
I invented Facebook.
I'm talking about a jury. I specialize in voir dire, jury selection. What a jury sees when they look at a defendant. Clothes, hair, speaking style, likability.
Likability.
He's so disgusted that even after all this, his likability still matters. And then the movie basically ends how it started, with Mark sitting across from Erica. Only this time they aren't sitting across a table, they're sitting on opposite ends of a computer screen, connected through a website that Mark created. I don't see Erica using Facebook as absolution of Mark, but I do see his friend request as an apology. And the movie ends with him restlessly seeing if his apology will be accepted. In a way, it's sort of redemptive, as his being shunned by Erica began this whole chain of events. But it's also cruelly circular. His work and success still haven't gotten him where he wants to be. He's still waiting for social acceptance, waiting to fit in, refreshing the page to see if it finally comes. Even though this movie is about the creation of the biggest social phenomenon since the invention of the internet, I don't think it will ever be dated because Mark's wanting to fit in will always be universal. Looking at the movie as a whole, at its most basic level, it's about a character that wants something, and it consistently stays about that. Really, it's about several characters wanting something. Mark, Eduardo, Sean, the twins. But the things they want don't necessarily line up, hence the drama and the conflict. That too makes it a timeless story. For example, Sean and Eduardo really want the same thing, to be the guy Mark turns to run the company. And so they find themselves in a battle for Mark's soul. Eduardo likely has better intentions, but Sean has Mark's infatuation. And Eduardo has one fatal flaw. He doesn't believe that Facebook will be as big as it gets.
You ever walk into a guy's den and see a picture of him standing next to 14 trout?
No, he's holding a 3,000-pound marlin.
Yep.
That's a good analogy.
Okay, but we all know that marlins don't really weigh 3,000 pounds, right?
He can't fathom that this company will one day be worth $40 billion. He doesn't think a 3,000-pound marlin even exists.
You want to end the party at 11.
I'm trying to pay for the party.
There won't be a party unless it's cool.
It may be Eduardo's only flaw, but it's enough.
What is this?
And while it's tempting to vilify Mark, I think that if there is a villain in this story, it's Sean. He uses Mark's suggestibility to insert himself into the mix and drive out the one guy that cares about Mark. And he tells Mark over and over and over that he's in charge and no one can tell him what to do.
I don't have a dog in this fight. I'm just a fan who came to say hi.
You're gonna hand him a business card that says, "I'm CEO, bitch." That's what I want for you.
And yet, ironically, there are times when Mark is basically Sean's stooge. What the Winklevossen want basically boils down to credit they believe they're due, financially and otherwise. And it's interesting to study how they change. They begin on top of the world, untouchable. They're athletic, wealthy, in the pork. And then they just get shit on, and shit on, and shit on.
It's not worthy of Harvard. It's not what Harvard saw in you.
And really shit on. And shit on some more.
Brutally close.
And shit on.
New website called Facebook.
I see this as an interesting way of showing how much of a revolution this is, in a Bob Dylan, the first shall be last kind of sense. It's a reversal of the norm. It's not the big and strong and popular who hold the power anymore, but the nerds who are quite literally taking over the world.
And they have Facebook at Cambridge.
And apparently Oxford and the London School of Economics.
Bosnia. They don't have roads, but they have Facebook.
That's what killed me. Nerds. Nerds run the fucking world. I couldn't believe it. Doesn't mean somebody big and scary. Nerds. Remember those kids in 4th grade who would strike out playing kickball?
And then the Winklevi just disappear for the entire third act. They're just gone. But it kind of makes sense if you look at their purpose in the overall story. They were representatives of the world that Mark longed to be a part of, but he outgrows them. He's not intimidated by them anymore.
My colleagues and I are doing things that no one in this room, including and especially your clients, are intellectually or creatively capable of doing.
So they're no longer needed in the third act. Mark has no use for them. And I think that's the most incredible and culturally relevant aspect of The Social Network. Looking at how Mark changes in relation to everyone else. How he fits into the world around him at the start of the film versus how he fits into the world around him at the end of the film. Which, by the way, is the world we currently live in. Instead of changing himself to better fit the world, by rowing crew or joining an a cappella group, etc., he changes the world to better fit himself. He spends most of his time on a computer. So what does he do?
I'm talking about taking the entire social experience of college and putting it online.
He makes everyone else more like him. Sean may be delusional, but when he goes on this tirade,
We lived on farms and then we lived in cities and now we're going to live on the internet.
Sean.
He's actually kinda right. And with this creation story as a backdrop, we see why. It's easier. It's easier to face the world from safely behind a keyboard than to actually face it. Her covered this too.
You always wanted to have a wife without the challenges of actually dealing with anything real. I'm glad that you found someone.
Man, Rooney Mara is really good at calling people out on their shit. T.S. Eliot once said in a poem, "There will be time to prepare a face to meet the faces that you meet." Basically, we present ourselves a certain way to the rest of the world. And it's easier to present ourselves, to present a face, online. And while Mark may have changed the world to better suit him, and changed how people interact with the world to be more like how he interacts with the world, my hope is that the 1.5 billion people who use this site don't end up like this character, paradoxically connected like never before, but completely alone, refreshing a webpage, hoping it brings them what they're looking for.
Seriously, what the hell's the chicken?